My last day at Hentai Group.it didn't rain. The weather was beautiful. Early autumn sunlight cut a bright diagonal across my desk through the grimy office window. Outside, the old locust trees' leaves were turning yellow, and a few spiraled down when the wind blew. I stood at the desk I'd occupied for 3 years, packing the last few things into a cardboard box. A worn fountain pen, a half-empty box of business cards, and at the very bottom, a crumpled notebook filled with client names and phone numbers from my first year in sales. The handwriting was uneven. Some names had circles next to them, some had crosses. Laozhou stood beside me, holding his own belongings. He'd left a week earlier, but came back today to help me move boxes. He watched me flip through the notebook and said, "You still have that thing. Keeping it." I said, "How many of those people are you still working with?" I closed the notebook and put it in the bottom of the box. "All of them. Just not at Hentai." I carried the box through the office. A few people looked up. Some looked down at their papers. A few old colleagues stood as if to speak, but only nodded. I didn't stop. At the elevator, I paused. The sales department conference room was at the end of the hall. Its door open. Inside, Zhao Jining was presenting to new sales hires, her voice clear and confident, carrying that natural authority of someone who belonged exactly where she was. The proposal she was presenting was one I'd finished the week before. The supply chain cost optimization data that I'd gathered at firsthand from 7 factories across 3 provinces. She hadn't mentioned my name. She just printed it, put her name and title as sales director in the bottom right corner, and made it her own. The elevator arrived. I stepped in. Laozhou followed. As the doors closed, I took one last look at the lit conference room at the end of the hall. Zhao Jianing's voice continued, steady and rehearsed. Laozhou didn't speak on the way down. On the first floor, the doors opened. I stepped out into the lobby and ran straight into Zhao Dihao. He wore his navy blue jacket, just coming back in with a briefcase. When he saw the box in my arms, he stopped. His mouth opened. Yin, you're really leaving? You signed my resignation." I said. He stood in the middle of the lobby as employees filed around him. He looked at me for a long moment, then said what I'd heard many times before. "You're young. It's good to go out and try new things. Mr. Zhao," I said. 7 years. I'm not going out to try things. I'm leaving. He was silent. An employee passed and greeted him. He nodded, then said quietly, "The door at Hentai will still be open." I didn't respond. I walked through the revolving doors, and the sunlight hit me full in the face. Early autumn light, not harsh, warm against my skin. Laozhou waited on the steps. When he saw me, he reached for the box. "Car's over there. I'll carry it." "It's heavy." "It's not heavy." I held the box tighter. Inside was the notebook with all those first-year client names, the half-empty business card box, a few photos taken at meals with old clients. None of it weighed much, but it was everything I'd accumulated over 7 years. I put the box in Laozhou's old van. In the passenger seat, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the top of my contacts. Mr. Chun, my first major client, landed 3 years ago, the toughest one to crack. I'd spent 4 afternoons in the coffee shop downstairs from his office. On the 4th day, he finally came down and said, "You're annoying, but your product's good." I dialed. He picked up on the 3rd ring, his voice booming as always. "Song Yen, where'd you go? Haven't seen you lately." Mr. Chun, I said. "I left. I'm out of Hentai. That thing I mentioned to you before, we can talk now." A beat of silence. Then his voice grew more serious. "You're going solo. Going solo. That supply chain framework I told you about. It works. I've already found 3 factories that checked every batch, tested them, compared them. I can bring costs down 25%. Another pause, longer this time. Then he said, "Song Yen, when are you free? Come to my office. I'll gather the procurement team, and you can walk them through your numbers. Tomorrow." "Fine." Tomorrow. I hung up and leaned back in the van seat, looking at Hentai's blue glass facade gleaming in the afternoon sun. I'd walked in and out of that building for 7 years, through every floor, every room. I'd closed my first 7-figure deal there. I'd also had my work taken and signed by someone else. Laozhou started the engine. He didn't ask who I'd called. He just looked ahead and said, "Where to?" "The warehouse. South side." "Got it." The van pulled away. In the rearview mirror, Hentai's building grew smaller and smaller, until it was just a blue dot swallowed by a turn. I closed my eyes. The wind through the half-open window carried the dry, leaf-scented smell of autumn. When I opened my eyes, rows of yellowing plane trees were sliding past, their canopies swaying like a line of waving hands. The next morning at 6 I arrived at the warehouse on the south side. I'd rented it with all my savings from before I quit. A disused steel warehouse, not large, with a few leaks in the ceiling and scrap iron frames left by the previous tenant. I'd spent 2 days clearing it out, then bought 3 used desks and a printer from a second-hand market. After Lao Zhou helped me arrange the furniture, he stood in the middle and surveyed the space. It'll be freezing in winter, boiling in summer. He said, when we have money, we'll get AC. When we have more money, we'll move. First, we need to exist. That afternoon, I went to see Mr. Chan, carrying 3 documents I'd prepared myself. A supply chain cost comparison table, quality inspection reports from the 3 factories, and a market demand analysis I'd reorganized in a week. 5 people from Chin's procurement team sat in the conference room. I stood in front of the whiteboard and talked for nearly 2 hours. When I finished, the procurement manager took off his glasses, rubbed his nose, and said to Chin, "Boss, if we use his numbers, the savings alone would cover half a year's bonus for the whole company." Chin looked at me from the head of the table. After a long pause, he said, "Song Yan, why didn't you bring this out when you were at Hentai? Because back then, what I brought out wouldn't have had my name on it." He didn't respond. He stood up, walked over, and extended his hand. "Start with one small order. I trust you halfway. The other half, wait until the goods are delivered." I shook his hand. His palm was dry and firm. He squeezed, then let go. When I walked out of that conference room, it was evening. The sky was burning orange. I stood outside Chin's building, watching the traffic and pedestrians stream past. My phone buzzed. "Lao Zhou." I covered the leaky spot in the roof with a tarp. "I'll come early tomorrow," I replied. "Okay." That was day 1 of Yuan Tuesday. No appointment letter, no office nameplate, no annual planning meeting. Just 3 people. Me, Lao Zhou, and a part-time accountant named Xiao Su. But we had something, the network I'd built over 7 years, piece by piece, like an unfinished web. Not pretty, but tight enough to hold. Yuan 2's first order. A batch of stair railings. Chin's procurement team threw us a small test, a renovation project for an old residential complex, needing 1.000 meters of stainless steel railings. Small order, total value around $4.000, profit under $300. I took it because the procurement manager had said, "Mr. Song, boss's idea. Start small. If it goes smoothly, bigger things follow, it'll go smoothly." I said. That week, I drove the borrowed van to the processing plant on the west side 3 times. First trip, confirm the raw material batch. Second, inspect the sample. Third, inspect the finished goods and load the truck. On installation day, I carried my toolbox to the old complex and hauled the railings up 6 flights of stairs, measuring, drilling, and anchoring each section. 2 full days. 2 new blisters on my hands. They burst and turned to calluses. Lao Zhou came to hand me tools and saw the tape on my palms. "Why not hire some workers? Profit on this order is 300. After paying workers, I'd barely have anything left. Then what's the point? The point is the future. After the 3rd order, I won't have to install them myself. But first, finish the first one. When the property manager did the final inspection, he ran his hand along the welded joints and said, "Smoother than I expected." I crouched beside my toolbox. He added, "If we have more work, we'll call you." I packed my tools and shook his hand. His palm was warm, dirt under his nails. After that order, Yuan 2 had its first revenue. $370. Lao Zhou screenshotted the bank notification and sent it to our 3-person group, chat.me. Lao Zhou, and Xiao Su. Xiao Su replied with a congratulations emoji. Lao Zhou replied with a string of periods. I stood in the warehouse with its patched roof, looking at the message. I put my phone away and went back to organizing the samples on the shelves. The 2nd month, Chen's office called again. Bigger order. Flooring materials for a private school gymnasium renovation. The procurement manager said, "Mr. Song, boss said the railings came out well. This one's yours. But it's tight. 1 month delivery." I checked my inventory and schedule and replied, 20 days. For the next 20 days, I practically lived at the factory. Days on the production line. Nights revising schedules. 3 a.m. calls with transport companies. Yuan 2 had 5 people then. Me, Lao Zhou, Xiao Su, and 2 new installation workers. Everyone was running on fumes. No one complained. One night, Lao Zhou fell asleep on a plastic stool at the factory. I draped my jacket over him. He woke up groggy and asked, "Did the shipment go out?" "Yeah." "Go back to sleep." He closed his eyes. The shipment arrived 3 days early. Among the inspectors was Mr. Chen himself. He crouched down, checked the edge seams and wear layer thickness, then stood and brushed the dust off his hands. He said something I'd remember for years. When you sat in that coffee shop for 4 afternoons that I knew you'd go solo someday. Back then that I didn't know myself. I said, now you know. He nodded and walked off, that then turned back. Song Yen. Yuan 2 is a good name that I'd come up with it my first night in the warehouse that's sitting at the old desk editing quotes. I wrote a list of names on scratch paper and settled on Yuan Tuesday Yuan.distance. Tuesday journey. Simple. You walk your own road. And the distance gets covered. By the third month. I started hiring. First a logistics coordinator, then a salesperson. Then a client relations person. The warehouse expanded from 1 unit to 2, then to the empty workshop next door. Lao Zhou no longer ate boxed lunches on the floor with me. He had his own desk, with a computer, a file rack, and a pothose plant from home. When he wasn't busy, he'd stand at the warehouse entrance with his cup, watching the trucks come and go, then look back and say, this place is getting full. At the end of the first year, Yuan 2's revenue was nearly double what I projected. I gathered everyone for a hot pot dinner at the new place next to the warehouse. 10 of us around a round table. Steam fogging the windows. I raised my glass and said, first year's done. Lao Zhou added, second year will be better. Glasses clinked. At the start of the second year, I used the first year's momentum to do something. Rework the entire supply chain. The biggest problem at Hentai. I'd seen it clearly over 7 years. Their procurement relied on a few big established factories with high prices and thin margins. But the market was full of smaller, stable factories with solid quality. They just lacked visibility and distribution. They quoted nearly 20% lower. I spent my first year visiting those factories, one by one, talking, watching operators on the production line. Some owners initially wouldn't engage, thinking my volume was too small and unstable. I'd go back 2 weeks later with a new quote or a process improvement suggestion. 3 months, 6 visits. On the 6th, one owner said that you're so persistent, it'd be a shame not to work with you. By the end of the second year, Yuan 2's client list had grown from 3 to nearly 40. I had steady cash flow. A real office. And a warehousing center for 30 people. One day, Lao Zhou stood at the office entrance looking at the client distribution map on the wall for a long time. He turned to me. Song Yen. You're wider now than when you were at Hentai. What do you mean? Back then. After you closed the deal, you went back to your desk. Now. When you come back, the whole office is yours. I sat behind my new desk, looking at the filled schedule boards and client follow-up logs. I didn't say anything, but something inside me loosened. Something that had been tense for 7 years at Hentai. So tight that when someone took it from me, it didn't break. It just compressed. Now it was releasing. In the spring of the third year, Yuan 2 moved for the third time. A real office building with glass facades, an elevator. And a cafe downstairs. On my first day in the new office, I stood at the window looking at the streets and traffic below. I remembered that early autumn afternoon 3 years ago, walking out of Hentai's revolving doors with a cardboard box, the sunlight just as warm. Back then, I had $370 and an idea. Now I had the idea. More money. And more people. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through contacts. Old Hentai clients. Former colleagues I hadn't talked to much. I hesitated and didn't message them. I wasn't sure how they saw me now. A guy who'd been pushed out. Reappearing 3 years later. Some things have to wait for the right moment. That evening, I was revising a contract when Lao Zhou pushed the door open and placed an envelope on my desk. Industry Summit invitation. I opened it. The cover bore the organizer's logo. Inside was a guest badge and an agenda. On the second page, I saw a familiar name. Hentai Group. Attendee. Zhao Jining. I put the agenda down. Outside, the sky was shifting from blue to pale gray. City lights flickering on. I looked back at the invitation's footer. A handwritten line from the organizers. Mr. Song, we look forward to your keynote. Your Yuan 2 journey is this year's most watched topic. I leaned back and looked out at the waking city. Lao Zhou asked from the doorway. Are you going? I put the invitation in the drawer. Yes. The day of the summit, I wore my custom dark gray suit, the first formal one I'd had made after Yuan 2 stabilized. When the tailor measured me, I stood in front of the mirror, looking at someone who didn't quite match my memory. Broader shoulders, sharper jawline. You must walk a lot, sir. The tailor said. I used to haul freight. The venue was the city's convention center. When I arrived at the lobby was full. Name badges glinting. Coffee aroma drifting from the self-serve station. At registration, the staff member looked up after checking my name and became noticeably warmer. Mr. Song, your seat is in the front row. Center. Here's your guest badge. I pinned it on. White with blue lettering. Yuan 2 Group Song Yen. Inside the main hall. It was more than half full. The stage was lit. Side screens scrolling the day's speaker list. My name appeared in the afternoon slot. Third after 2 industry veterans. I found my seat. Front row center. And flipped through the agenda. The current speaker was discussing industry standards. His voice echoed through the hall. The seat beside me was empty. To my right sat a man I didn't know. We exchanged cards. He was in building materials distribution. I chatted with him for a bit. And when he asked what Yuan 2 did. I said, similar to what hentai used to do. He thought for a moment and said hentai's not doing well now. I didn't respond. Near the end of the afternoon session. I noticed a figure slip in through the side door. She wore an emerald green skirt suit. Hair pinned up. A makeup heavier than 3 years ago, but the tiredness beneath it still showed. She carried a thick folder and sat in the third row. Near the edge. When she sat down. Her gaze swept forward. And stopped on me. She froze. Like someone had hit pause. She stared for about 3 seconds. Then slowly turned away. Placing the folder on her lap and flipping through it. After a few pages. Her hand rested on the paper without moving. The host announced the afternoon keynotes. The first was the veteran on policy trends. The second was a distributor on market strategy. When the second finished. The host said, next. We have Mr. Song Yen, chairman of Yuan 2 Group. Sharing rising against the current. A newcomer's 3,000 days. As I stood. I felt a gaze from the third row. Pressing into my back. I didn't turn around. I walked up the steps. The spotlight hit my face. And I squinted slightly. Behind the podium. I adjusted the mic and opened my prepared slides. When the screen switched. The first title appeared. Hentai Struggles and the Path to Breakthrough. Subtitle. Observations from an old employee. A hush fell over the room. People leaned forward. Murmured. I knew why. Hentai was an old name in the industry. In 3 years. IT had slipped from a regional leader to near collapse. Everyone talked about it privately. But no one had ever analyzed it publicly on a stage like this. I flipped to the second slide. A set of hentai's 5-year market share curve. Procurement cost trends. And customer churn rates. Some numbers I remembered, some I'd gathered through public channels. I spoke. I worked at hentai for 7 years. First 4. Sales. Last 3. Top salesperson. When I left. Hentai's market share still ranked in the top 5. 3 years later. It's 17th. Phones went up to capture the screen. I continued breaking down hentai's root problems. Rigid procurement. Fractured client relationships. Core talent drain. I gave specific examples for each. And after each. A solution. If we had done it differently. Those solutions weren't from books. They were ones I'd verified at Yuan 2 over 3 years. When I got to supply chain optimization. I pulled up the core data from the proposal I'd written at hentai 3 years ago. The numbers were identical. But now they appeared on Yuan 2's slide. Signed with my name. When I finished. The room was silent for 2 beats. Then the applause came. I stood in it. Looking at the faces. Familiar and unfamiliar. Nodding and note-taking. I took the mic off the stand and addressed the room. 3 years ago. When I resigned from hentai. The only thing I took was a notebook of business cards. I want to tell every one of you today. What was taken from you. You can rebuild yourself. The applause grew louder. I set the mic back on the stand and walked down. As I reached the steps. My peripheral vision caught the third row. Zhao Jining sat there. Her folder fallen to the floor. Paper scattered. She hadn't bent to pick them up. She was staring at the stage. Now emptied. Her lips moving silently. I returned to my seat. The building materials distributor leaned over and said quietly. Mr. Song, you worked at hentai. For a while. Figured. He nodded. I looked down at the last slide. Thank you. Beside the Yuan 2 logo. As the host continued. I heard someone stand up behind me. Footsteps from the third row. Past the second. Stopping at my row. I looked up. Zhao Jining stood in the aisle. Clutching her half-spilled folder. Her lips pressed tight, her face sallow under the white lights. Her voice wasn't loud, but enough for the surrounding rows. Song Yen, can we talk privately? People glanced over. I leaned back and looked at her. She stood in the light. The corner of her emerald skirt wrinkled, probably from standing up too quickly. Her fingers gripped the folder's edge. Knuckles white. I stood. People shifted to make space. We walked to the side corridor, quieter than the main hall, the only distant microphone echoes. She stopped by a fire extinguisher, but turned to face me, and took a breath. Hentai is falling apart, she said. Over $1 million in debt. The bank is auctioning the factory next month. My father's health is bad, he's been hospitalized twice. She paused, her voice dropping. That supply chain framework you had at Hentai. Could we use that same approach now? I presented the core data on stage today. I said, what do you want from me now? She opened her mouth, then forced out the words. Could you lend me money? Or connect me with someone? Zhao Jianing. I said her name. She stopped. 3 years ago, the day you took my proposal, you and your father were in his office. Do you remember what you said? Her fingers tightened on the folder. Your office was at the end of the hall. My desk was in the middle. You left the door cracked. I looked into her eyes. You said he's useful. Use him, then let him go. I remembered that for 3 years. Zhao Jianing leaned against the wall, shoulders dropping. The folder finally slipped from her grip, scattering papers across the floor. She didn't bend to pick them up. She stood there, her composure finally shattered. She opened her mouth, but her voice was smaller this time. What would it take for you to help? I looked at her and said, Monday morning. Your company's conference room. I'll bring my procurement team. Everyone who needs to be there. Be there. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She just stood there. The corridor light exposing the gray beneath her foundation. I turned and walked back. At the entrance to the hall, I glanced back. She was still there, leaning against the wall, papers scattered, and not picking them up, I pushed through the door. The spotlight was on the stage, the next speaker starting to scatter applause. I sat back in the front row, opened the agenda, and wrote a word in the margin next to Hentai's entry. Monday morning. Light rang. I sat in my car, watching Hentai's building through the rain-flecked windshield. 3 years since I'd been inside. It looked older, a cracked glass panel on the facade unreplaced, the flagpole flag rain-soaked and limp, I flicked the wipers twice and stepped out. Lao Zhou gathered files in the back. You coming up? I asked. He nodded, taking the files. The lobby had a new receptionist. She didn't recognize me and asked who I was here for. I said I had an appointment with Mr. Zhao. She called, then said, Mr. Zhao says to go up to the 5th floor conference room. He'll be there shortly. I in the elevator. Lao Zhou murmured, that's different from before. How? Before, the security guards greeted you. He glanced at me. Now the receptionist didn't even know who you are. Normal. I said, 3 years. Everything that could change has changed. On the 5th floor, the hallway carpet was worn through in places with water stains. The conference room door was open. Inside, a few people were already seated. Hentai's current core management. Most I didn't know. A few were old faces. At the front sat Zhao Dihao in his old navy jacket, his hair completely white, his face deeply lined, his frame shrunken. When he saw me walk in, he rose slowly, unsteadily. He stood there looking at me, his lips parted, but no sound. Beside him sat Zhao Jianing. White shirt, hair tied back, lighter makeup than at the summit, but the shadows under her eyes deeper. Our eyes met briefly. She looked away first. I sat across the long table. Lao Zhou beside me. I placed the procurement framework agreement on the table, cover side up. We'd reviewed it 3 times with legal. Every clause was clear. I opened the first page and began speaking slowly, each number precise. Zhao Jianing listened without interrupting. Through the first clauses, Zhao Dihao's hand trembled. His teacup sat in front of him untouched. When I finished the 3rd clause, he spoke, his voice hoarse. Song Yen. After signing these, what will Hentai have left? A way to survive. I said. Without it, the bank takes the factory next month. With it, your company gets raw materials at 15% below market through Yuan 2's procurement system. And your facilities and equipment are integrated into Yuan 2's production schedule. You won't lose money, but your operational control will narrow. Zhao Dihao sat in silence for a while. He reached for his tea, his fingers trembling. He set it down again. Zhao Jianing pressed his hand gently, then looked up at me. Supply chain integration. I can sign. Dad stepping back. That's negotiable. But the 3rd clause. She paused. You want me to apologize in front of the entire sales department? Is that really necessary? Yes. I said, meeting her eyes. Zhao Jianing. When you took my proposal and signed your name, and your father praised your independent deal in front of the whole department, did you think it was necessary? Did you ever think the top salesperson who wrote that proposal needed a public word? Her lips pressed together. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Zhao Dihao spoke, his voice low. Jianing, Sign it. She turned to look at her father. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking out the window. Well, you took it. It's time to give it back. She looked down at the agreement. Her finger traced the third clause. She paused for 3 seconds, then picked up the pen and signed below it. The sound of the nib on paper was sharp in the quiet room. She set the pen down without looking up. I collected the agreement. Lao Zhou made notes. Xiao Su coordinated the financial handover. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. Past noon. As people filed out, Zhao Dihao was the last to stand, steadying himself on the table's edge. At the door, he turned and looked back at me. He didn't speak. He just stood there for a few seconds. Then left. Zhao Jining followed. Then stopped. Friday afternoon. Sales department meeting. I'll be there. Good. She left. The room emptied. But I stayed. Lao Zhou packed the files. Glanced at me. And said, "You staying?" For a bit. He nodded and went out. I sat across the long table. The distance between me and the chair I'd once sat in. 3 years ago I'd sat in this room while Zhao Jining presented her independent proposal, with Zhao Dihao applauding. Now I sat on the other side. I looked down at the signature at the end of the agreement. Zhao Jining's name under the third clause. Her handwriting more rushed than before. At the last stroke, curving up like an unfinished word. I stood and walked out. A window at the end of the hallway was opened. The afternoon breeze carrying the smell of rain-wet earth. I looked down at the parking lot. Zhao Dihao climbed slowly into a black sedan. Zhao Jining stood beside it for a moment, looking up at the building, probably at the 5th floor. I stayed at the window. She looked for a while, then got in. The car drove off. I stayed a moment longer. In the lot below, Lao Zhou's white van was parked near the exit. Dust lay on the windowsill. I traced a line through it. Beneath was the original gray-white tile. Clean. I turned toward the elevator. My phone buzzed. Lao Zhou, waiting downstairs. Rain stopped. I replied, "Okay," and pressed the button. Friday, 2 p.m. I walked into Hentai's building again. No rain. The sky clear. The hallway lights were brighter. A few bulbs replaced. The conference room doors were open. Chairs had been rearranged. With extra folding chairs along the wall. Nearly 40 people filled the room. Old and new faces. Some who must have heard what was happening and returned specifically. As I walked in. A few nodded. Some opened their mouths, but didn't speak. Others looked away. I sat in the third row. Near the edge. Lao Zhou in front and Xiao Su beside me. He'd come from finance, saying I want to see it for myself. See what point 3 years ago. When you left I hadn't started. But Lao Zhou told me, "I want to be here today." I didn't answer. I looked toward the stage. When Zhao Jining stepped up, the room went quiet. She wore a dark knit sweater. Her hair in a low ponytail. Light makeup. She stood behind the podium. She'd used many times. A note card in front of her. She glanced at it. Then looked up and spoke. Her voice was a little hoarse, but every word was clear. The annual sales proposal from 3 years ago. A core part wasn't written by me. The room was so quiet I could hear the wind seeping through the blinds. She paused, gripping the podium's edge, then let go. That part was written by Song Yan. He wrote the entire supply chain optimization framework and data. I took it, signed the deal, and presented it as my own work. That was false. I apologized to Song Yan and to everyone who was there that day. She stood there, the note card crumpled in her hand. She glanced down at the room. Her eyes paused on me for a moment, then moved on. She stepped down slowly, passing my seat. As she stopped in the aisle, back to the room, and looked at me from the corner of her eye. Her lips moved, but nothing came out. She returned to her seat. The room stayed quiet. Then someone stood and started clapping. I recognized him. Li Chung, an old hentai salesperson who'd worked the field with me. He clapped 3 times. Others followed slowly. Not a thunderous applause, but one of quiet, delayed closure. I didn't stand. I didn't clap. I sat and watched those who'd once applauded Zhao Jining's independent deal, now clapping in another direction. When Li Chung sat down, he looked at me from 2 rows away and gave a firm nod. I nodded back. After the meeting, people moved toward the door. Someone passed me and said softly, "Song Ge." I turned. A young man in hentai workwear stood in the aisle, hands in his pockets, a little hesitant. "Song Ge, you trained me for 3 months before you left. I've been here ever since. I remembered a new grad at the time. Nothing but raw. He'd lost a quote sheet his first month and cried in the stairwell. I'd called the client for a replacement. He'd grown into a team lead before I left. I hadn't seen him since. He pulled his hand from his pocket. It held an old fountain pen, the cap wrapped in worn transparent tape. "Song Ge," he said. When you left, I never got to say this. The things you taught me, I still use them. I looked at the pen. Hentai was engraved on its barrel, the edges worn white. That's good, I said. He nodded. Put the pen back in his pocket. And left with the crowd. The room slowly emptied. I stayed. Outside, the afternoon light had shifted from bright white to warm gold, painting a long, moving line across the table. I looked at my hands. Faint white marks from old cuts hauling freight healed now. I turned my palms over. The lines were deeper than before, but steady. Lao Zhou waited at the door, leaning against the frame. When I finally stood, he said, "The penny and that was the one you left on your desk before you left." I thought about it. Maybe, I said. I lost a pen. Didn't think much of it. He nodded. He turned up, then looked back. "Dinner tonight. Li Cheng wants to see you." I straightened my collar. "All right. Bring Xiao Su." We walked out. The hallway sunlight was angling, stretching shadows long. Footsteps echoed. At the elevator, I looked back at the window at the end of the hall, the same direction I'd carried that box 3 years ago. The same light. But this time, I wasn't alone. Lao Zhou, Li Cheng, Xiao Su, and that young man with the pen walked behind me. Footsteps blending together. The elevator arrived. We stepped in. Mirrored doors reflected a row of silhouettes, different shapes, different clothes. I in the same space. The one in the dark gray suit looked at his phone. Someone called Song Gu. He looked up. The elevator descended. Light seeped through the crack, warming the car. The dinner stretched late. Li Cheng chose a Hunan restaurant in the old part of town. A small place, but packed with people. Steam and chilly aroma rising. The 5 of us. Me, Lao Zhou, Xiao Su. Li Cheng. And the young man with the pen. Su Fan. Huddled around a round table. Plates filled the table. Cups held tea. Not alcohol. Because we had work tomorrow. But the mood was lively. Voices loud. Laughter rising with the chilly steam. Li Cheng put a piece of chopped pepper fish head in my bowl. "Song Yin, the day you left, I sat at my desk and didn't stand. I've always thought I should have stood, even just to say, 'What do we do now that you're gone?' Saying it wouldn't have changed anything. I'd already decided. I know. He set down his chopsticks and leaned back. Thinking. Those 3 years you were top seller, everyone knew those clients were yours. When Mr. Zhao reassigned them, everyone knew those clients were yours. But no one said anything. Did you say anything back then?" He was quiet. "No, it's the same now." I took a bite of the fish. "Late, but it's been said." Li Cheng smiled. Finished his tea in one gulp. Su Fan sat beside me. Quiet. He placed the old pen on the table's edge. Occasionally spinning it. "Can it still write?" I asked. He unscrewed the cap. Drew a line on a napkin. Clear. Smooth ink. "Still works. The body's just old. Functions enough." He nodded. Capped it. And put it back in his pocket. Xiao Su kept his head down. Eating. Occasionally looking up. Lao Zhou put a rib in his bowl. "Eat. Don't worry about us. I'm listening." Xiao Su said. "You're all saying good stuff." Near the end, Lao Zhou remembered something and pulled an envelope from his bag. "Forgot to give this to you at the meeting. Zhao Dihao left it on my desk before he went. He said to read it later. I took it. A craft paper envelope. No name. I folded it into my inner pocket. Li Cheng noticed, but didn't ask. After the meal. Past 10 p.m. I saw a few people off at the alley entrance. Before Su Fan left. He shook my hand. His grip stronger than before. Calluses on his palm. "Song Gu," he said. "I'm back at work tomorrow. Send me the onboarding process." "Will do." He nodded and walked away. The alley was quiet. Just me and Lao Zhou. The streetlight stretched our shadows long across the cobblestones. Lao Zhou looked at me. "That letter. Read it now." I pulled the envelope from my pocket and opened it. Inside was a folded letter, the paper a little wrinkled, as if it had been crumpled and smoothed out. Zhao Dihao's handwriting shakier than 3 years ago. The ink lighter. "Song Yin, the day you left, I told you Hentai's door would stay open. I thought you'd come back. When you didn't, I realized how empty those words were. Before your mother passed, she called me. She asked me to pass on a message. She said, Yin Yan's always been a digger. Once he starts, he doesn't stop. Whatever road he takes, he's serious. Just trust him. I didn't understand what trust him meant back then. Now I do. Thank you for coming back." Zhao Dihao. I stood under the light and read the letter twice. I folded it back and placed it in my inner pocket. Next to the old business card notebook. The envelope pressed against it. Lao Zhou didn't ask. He said, "Let's go." "Cars that way." I followed. The autumn night wind carried a dry chill. I looked back once at the restaurant's warm sign, then turned and kept walking. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Zhao Dihao's number that still saved never called in 3 years. I didn't dial. I sent a text. Received 0.5 minutes later that he replied. Good. I locked the screen and put the phone away. The notebook sat against my chest, its edges warmed by my body heat. The cover read Client Directory in my own messy handwriting. Every name was mine. Su Fan still had the pen. Zhao Dihao still had my mother's letter. Zhao Jining signed that apology. Some things taken away had been returned. Some things lost were picked up by someone else. Some things had never been lost. It just carried in a pocket for years, waiting for the right moment to be pulled out. I walked through the autumn night, the notebook's edge pressing against my skin. Solid, reassuring. The integration moved forward steadily. Hentai's supply chain began merging into Yuan 2's system. The first shipment under the new process went out the second week. Lao Zhou watched the data board for 2 days and said, costs down 1%. Less than you predicted, but still falling. It'll keep falling. After Zhao Jianing's public apology, the atmosphere at Hentai's sales department shifted. Some left, some stayed. Most of those who stayed were filling out Yuan 2 onboarding forms. Su Fan was among them. He filled out his form, handed it to HR. And waited at the door for me. He pulled out the old pen and traced his signature one more time at the bottom. Then looked up and saw me coming. Songgo. He said, holding the form out. Is this all filled out right? I looked at it. Beside his name, under desired position. He'd written key account manager, a role he'd never held at Hentai. 2 levels above his old position. Su Fan. I said, you've never done key accounts. He capped the pen and looked at me. You told me before. When you're ready, you can move up. I've been ready for 3 years. I looked at him, different from the young man who'd crouched in that stairwell crying. Straighter back. Sharper chin. All right. I said, let's see how you do up there. He smiled and turned in the form. Zhao Jining joined Yuan 2's supply chain subsidiary as a mid-level manager, overseeing supplier qualification reviews and daily coordination. Someone asked me, aren't you afraid she'll pull something again? She can't. Everything she does now is double-checked. And I paused. She's better at this than sales. Her strength isn't client-facing. It's process management. Lao Zhou looked at me when he heard that. You're actually defending her. I'm not defending her. I'm saying that after 3 years in procurement, that I've learned that people work best when they're in the right role. Her old position was wrong. This one's right. In her first week, I ran into Zhao Jining at the break room. She was making tea. When she saw me, her hands paused briefly. She continued steeping, pouring, waiting 2 minutes, then taking a sip. She turned to face me, holding the cup. At Hentai. I used to see you in the break room too. You never looked at me back then, because back then, looking at you wouldn't have changed anything. She looked down at her tea bag that the tag read Yuan Tuesday Company issued. And now, does looking at you change anything? Yes. I said, now you're at the desk opposite me. I need to know what you're doing. She didn't get angry. She walked away with her cup. Then she stopped and turned. Song Yin. I looked at her. She said, quietly, at the summit. I said, he's useful. You remembered that for 3 years. I've been thinking about why I said it. Did you figure it out? She set the cup down and looked at me seriously. Because I was afraid. Afraid that if you stayed, my father would pick you to take over. After you left, he didn't pick anyone. The company started going downhill. I learned that not everything can be won by taking. She picked up her cup and walked away. I watched her silhouette disappear down the hall. Autumn light slanting through the window onto the gray-white floor. That night at home, I took the old notebook from my inner pocket and opened it on the table. Page 1. Messy client names with circles and crosses. Page 2. Slightly steadier. By page 3 and 4, the handwriting was more consistent. Page 7. Torn halfway out. That was Hentai's final year. Clients that had been reassigned. I'd probably torn them out. But on the back of that torn page were the new names I'd added after I quit. My handwriting far steadier than the first year. I turned to the last page. There. In fresh handwriting from this morning. Was a line. New page. All the names are here. I placed the notebook beside my mother's photo. A faded picture of her in a floral blouse, holding a sheaf of wheat. Smiling in an autumn field. The notebook sat beside the frame. The light caught the cover clearly. I stood there for a long time. Remembering her last call. I'd been busy with a project. Unloading at the warehouse. She'd asked when I'd come see her. I said after this rush. The rush ended. But I was too late. That call was the last. I touched the edge of the frame. Mom. I said, I got the notebook. All the names are here. Outside, the city glowed under a deep blue night. I turned off the study light and stepped onto the balcony. The wind from the south was cool and dry. A few pedestrians passed below, their footsteps distant. When I came back inside, I checked my phone, a message from Zhao Jianing. Song Yen. During the qualification review today, I flagged a supplier quote that looked padded. I noted it in the system. You can check. I read it, then replied. Checked. It's fine. I locked the screen and sat on the couch. On the coffee table, the notebook lay open to the last page. I closed it and put it in the drawer, alongside a few old photos, pens, and a worn notebook. The drawer was full now. Tomorrow, there was more to do. Yuan 2's monthly review, Hentai's second shipment schedule, the procurement system update test. One thing after another, all moving forward. I turned off the living room light and walked through the dark hallway to the bedroom. Lying down, a car's headlights swept across the ceiling through the curtain and disappeared. I lay still for a moment, then closed my eyes. The notebook sat quietly in the coffee table drawer, beside my mother's photo. She was still smiling. Things were still moving forward. The road was just a little wider now, and I could see a little farther. The first joint sales meeting after integration was a Tuesday, in early winter. Clear sky, but the wind was cold. The venue was Yuan 2's new campus multi-purpose hall, 300 seats filled, with people standing in the back. Above the stage, the screen read Yuan 2 Group, 2024 National Sales Conference. Below it, Yuan 2's logo and Hentai's original logo sat side by side. I'd asked design to do it that way. Someone had asked me, don't you want to drop the Hentai named? No need. The name wasn't all bad. It was just used wrong. Now it's used right. Keep it. I stood in the wings, looking through the curtain gap. Front row, Yuan 2's core leadership. Lao Zhou in the center, Xiao Su beside him, Li Chung, and other key members who'd built this from the warehouse. Second row, newer faces from the past 2 years. Third row and beyond, more familiar faces that most of Hentai's sales team had completed onboarding, wearing Yuan 2's dark blue workwear. Sitting beside suit-clad colleagues, Lao Zhou stood and looked back, then gave me a small nod. I took the mic and walked onto the stage. The spotlight hit me, warm enough to make me squint. The room went quiet, hundreds of eyes on me. I raised the mic and said, 7 years ago, when I joined Hentai, I was a rookie who didn't know anything. The room was still. The wind outside made a distant sound, my first year in sales, that I didn't know how to talk to clients. Once I spent a whole pack of cigarettes squatting outside a client's office and still didn't go in. When I finally did, they kicked me out after 3 sentences. That night I squatted in the stairwell. I paused. The same stairwell Su Fan squatted in later. I thought I wasn't cut out for this, but I didn't leave. My mother called and said, if you've dug yourself in, dig yourself out. Don't get stuck. I listened. The next day, I went back to that client's office. Got in. Talked for 10 minutes. That client became my first long-term account. A few people laughed. Others listened quietly. I glanced at Su Fan in the third row. The old pin sat before him, capped. He was looking at me, the corner of his mouth lifted. 3 years later, I was top salesperson. 3 years after that, top salesperson again. Then another year, top salesperson a third time. I paused. But after the third time, my accounts were reassigned. My proposal was taken. I quit. The day I carried that cardboard box out of Hentai, IT held a notebook of business cards, half a box of name cards, and a photo of my mother when she was young. The room was dead quiet. I looked at the side screen. IT switched to the second slide. A scan of my old notebook's first page. Messy handwriting with circles and crosses. Yellowed. Curled edges. People leaned closer. Some recognized the handwritten names, and their expressions shifted. After I left Hentai, I took 3 years to find those names again. I flipped to the final page of the new notebook. New page. All the names are here. The handwriting was much steadier than the first page. Some names had re-signed under new terms. Some were at the same companies with new contacts. But they were all still there. The people beneath the names were still there. The road was still there. I took the mic off the stand and stepped forward. In the edge light, I could see faces more clearly. Lao Zhou with red eyes, looking down at his notebook. Xiao Su blinking fast. Li Chung grinning wide. Su Fan holding the pen, which he'd spun half a turn and caught. 3 years ago, when I quit, someone said, it's good to go out and try new things. I want to tell that person. I paused. I made it out. But I came back through Hentai's door. Not the same way. With both names side by side. Yuan 2 and Hentai. We were a family that split apart. Now everyone in this room is a family sitting back at the same table. I put the mic back. 2 seconds of silence. Then applause burst from the front row. Laozhou first, then the second row, the third, like a wave filling the room. I stood in that applause, looking at all the faces, familiar and unfamiliar, young and not so young, dark blue workwear and white shirts, all in the same space, clapping in the same direction. When the applause faded, I continued, next year's goals, market strategy, team structure. Slides turned, numbers given. People took notes, nodded, raised questions. After the meeting, I was packing up when Lao Zhou came over, took the mic stand, and put it back. He stood beside me. Your mother would be proud today. I closed my folder. She knows. He patted my shoulder and walked off. I finished packing and walked into the hallway. People lingered, chatting. A few greeted me. I nodded. At the end of the hall, Su Fan stood by the window, capping and uncapping the pen. Li Cheng was with him. When I approached, they stopped. Su Fan put the cap on. Song Gu. I signed up for the regional bid next week. Good. Get your materials to me 2 days early. He nodded, pocketed the pen, and walked away. Li Cheng watched him go, then looked at me. He's like you were back then, better than me. I said. He's got more patience. Li Cheng smiled and walked off too. The hallway grew quieter. I looked out the window. The parking lot below, Yuan 2 and hentai vehicles parked side by side. Different logos, but similar colors. People shook hands, loaded things into cars. The winter sun cast thin silver light on the rooftops. I put my hand in my pocket. The notebook's edge pressed against my palm. It was lighter now. Old pages turned. But the cover was still there. All the names were still there. I turned toward the elevator. Then I stopped, looking at the new nameplate on the wall. Yuan 2 Group, Hentai Division. The letters were clean. The background pale gray. I looked at it for 2 seconds. Then kept walking. The elevator doors closed. And I caught a last glimpse of the sunlit window at the end of the hall. The sky outside was brilliant blue. Like a pane of clean glass. Sunlight poured in. Illuminating the floor. Elevator down. Light seeped through the crack. Falling on my sleeve. The doors opened. The ground floor wind was stronger. Pushing through the revolving doors. I stepped out and took a deep breath. The clean. Cold air of early winter. My phone buzzed. Laozhou. Car at the east parking exit. Come over, okay. I locked the screen and stepped down. My shadow. Shortened by the midday sun. Walked beneath me. The notebook was still in my pocket. As it had been 3 years ago. Against me. But back then. It held only my name. Now it held many names. They walked with me. The wind came from the front. Cold. But with sunlight in it. I crossed the lot. Tire tracks glinted faintly in the dry winter light. Faint lines pointing in different directions. I walked toward the east exit, the sun shining from the south. Lighting the entire lot.